This episode contains spoilers for West Side Story, the new one, but also the old one, and the stage adaptation of it, and Romeo and Juliet, so spoilers for everything. Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of the Cinephile Gamers podcast. I am your host, Bo Smith, and for this now post-Oscar season, what exactly are we going to cover on the show? Well, to be honest, I have watched a couple of the other Oscar movies, and I still want to watch Dune, so that is on my list to watch. But since I had previously watched Licorice Pizza and West Side Story, which is obviously what you're going to hear today, I'm going to do reviews on those as well. I would have put those out before, but life happens. I got sick one week as well, and so I just had to delay that and put out something else that I thought was more important. But we're going to go ahead and cover those two movies as well. I've also got Kirby and the Forgotten Lands that I am going to be reviewing at some point as well. I am in the process of completing that game. Gotta say, so far, initial impressions, in case you're curious on it, it's really good. You should definitely pick it up. But anyways, we're going to focus on West Side Story, and I mean the new West Side Story, 2021's version. So, if you are not familiar with the West Side Story, what it basically is it's set in the 1950s of New York. There are two rival teenage gangs, the Sharks and the Jets. The Jets being made up of white teenage Americans and the Sharks being made up of Puerto Ricans who had immigrated into New York. And as the story goes, this is very much based off of Romeo and Juliet. So if you've seen or read Romeo and Juliet, you have seen or read West Side Story, essentially. So basically, it's two warring gangs that are trying to take control of their land. And between those two, you have Tony, who is part of the Jets group, and then Maria, who is part of the Sharks group. They eventually meet each other, they fall in love, and they start to form a relationship, even though they know that if they were caught, they could both get in trouble. And that's pretty much what happens. Trouble ensues. Like I said, if you have seen Romeo and Juliet, read Romeo and Juliet, then you essentially know what's going to happen in West Side Story. Now, that being said, this is not to say, oh, if you hate Romeo and Juliet, you're probably going to hate West Side Story. No, far from it, actually. I really think West Side Story is really good. I'll be honest, this is my first time I've ever watched West Side Story. I have never watched the musical. I've never watched the original movie, so I was going semi-blind into this. Granted, I've heard the popular songs, like America, or I've Just Met a Girl Named Maria, those sorts of songs. So obviously, this is a very influential musical, so I'm not oblivious to it. West Side Story 2021 is directed by Steven Spielberg, who has made essentially everything you love and know. And then it also stars Ansel Elgort as Tony, Ariana DeBose as Anita, Rachel Zegler as Maria, Mike Faist as Riff, David Alvarez as Bernardo, and Rita Moreno as Valentina, who was part of the original West Side Story movie, which I thought was very interesting. In fact, Steven Spielberg had made her an executive producer and wanted her input on what was wrong about the original movie that we want to correct for this current iteration of the movie. And that's what I want to start off with by saying. I thought this was kind of an interesting choice for Steven Spielberg to make because obviously the man is an incredible director, has made some great movies. So it's kind of odd that he has ventured off into a musical movie. And I was kind of curious on that. But from what I have read in a couple of different articles doing my research for this episode is that West Side Story was a big part of his childhood growing up. I mean, he loved this musical and he loved the original movie and he wanted to, in a way, pay homage to it while also putting his own spin on it. And since I had never seen the original movie as well, I was kind of curious what was in that one compared to what's in this new one. And that's where Spielberg actually takes some, not liberties necessarily, but he kind of corrects a few things. In fact, one of the biggest things in this is that the Sharks have a bigger role in the movie. And actually are mostly Puerto Rican in this movie. From what I understand, the original movie had a bunch of white actors playing Puerto Ricans, and obviously probably shouldn't be doing that in today's day and age. But the Sharks actually have a bigger role in this movie. You actually get to see a little bit about Bernardo and Anita, as well as Maria and just kind of their struggles and what they live through in day-to-day life. Another thing about the sharks specifically is that in the original movie, of course, with white actors playing these Puerto Rican characters, there's going to be a lot of brown face. And even with a few of the Puerto Rican cast members like Rita Moreno, they had browned her up a little bit more. And that is something that you kind of find interesting about this movie. There's a bunch of different colored Puerto Rican Americans in this movie. So it's not all going to be one skin tone because Puerto Ricans are a wide mixture of people with a bunch of different backgrounds. So you see some darker, you see some lighter, and I kind of like the contrast of this. And, it just shows that not everyone fits into one type of mold. And I guess that also kind of plays into the theme of the movie as well. A few of the other changes to this movie is that some of the song lyrics have been changed up. For one instance, the song America has been changed from the original movie because Anita, in her role of singing the song, had said that Puerto Rico was basically an island of tropical diseases and it should be sunk back in the ocean. And it doesn't bash Puerto Rico in this movie. It just kind of explains the differences of, while Bernardo is trying to say, we should go back to Puerto Rico. It had this, and Anita is saying, but in America you have this. And it just wants to show contrast while also not trying to bash our Puerto Rican friends. I think another reason that Spielberg also wanted to do this movie in this day and age is because the movie, of course, heavily focuses on racial issues, which it's kind of sad to think that we still have some racial issues, 60 years after the original movie had made a debut. But it just shows that in this movie about how white teenager versus the Puerto Rican teenagers are warring with each other. And of course, they do call each other horrible names that should not be repeated. And of course, you kind of still see that in some places here in America in this day and age, which is sad to think about. But that's kind of what I like to think that Spielberg had done this movie as well, is that reason too. So right off the bat with this movie, I mean, the cinematography and the way shots are edited and put together, it is an absolutely gorgeous film. In fact, I'm a little surprised that it did not win for that specifically, but of course, I know Dune is the technical better movie. But whenever you watch this movie, you are going to be impressed with how things line up. Like from the first 2 minutes of the movie, I'm like, wow, this is a very pretty movie. And what I also really like is that the choreography is great and it's fun. It's super sharp on the moves and they look natural as well, which is kind of hard to pull off because going into a musical, you're expecting, these big dance numbers, but whenever they play out, you're like, oh, this is a lot of fun. It almost seems like a natural flow for this movie too. Music, of course, is going to be great, but what else do you expect from a famous musical like West Side Story? Like I mentioned before, the cinematography has that beautiful 50s feel to it, has some pretty pastel and muted colors that make the bright ones really pop out. In fact, whenever you see like the city of New York, it's kind of this grayed version of itself. But whenever you see the dresses that Anita sews together and wears throughout the movie, they really pop out, especially throughout the whole musical number of America. Same way with some of the Jet songs too, like Mr. Krupke as well, which is a really fun musical number. There's also one shot specifically in the song Maria where Tony splashes water and then stands over it and it starts shimmering in behind Tony, and it's absolutely breathtaking. In fact, I had to stop and I was like, wow, that is a beautiful shot. I want to know how they specifically captured that because that was very impressive. Mackenzie had mentioned whenever she was watching this movie too that you kind of get La La Land vibes, and I definitely see where she's coming from on that. It kind of takes that same style and approach that La La Land took as well, but while still maintaining that West Side Story feel. Going on to some of the performances in this movie, I like Ansel Elgort as Tony. I think he's a fun actor in general, but he really does well. I like his singing voice. Rachel Zegler is a newcomer to the industry, and she absolutely nails it in this movie. Like, it is amazing hearing her sing, and I can't wait to see what more she does in her future career as well. In fact, I was kind of disappointed that she didn't get an honorary Oscar nomination as well, because she did a really good job and I loved her performance in the movie. Corey Stoll, who I didn't mention earlier, is also in this movie. He does a good job as the detective in this movie and tries to mitigate both sides of the Jets and the Sharks and try to keep things from escalating even further, which of course he doesn't do a good job of doing that. But I liked his performance in it. Mike Faced as Riff, who is the leader of the Jets, and then David Alvarez as Bernardo, who's the leader of the Sharks. Both do a really good job. I like how they portray both of their characters as these head honchos that I'm going to make sure I lead my group and do the right thing by them. And of course, it comes together in a huge fight scene later on. But I really like both of them. In fact, you kind of see where both sides come from. Neither one is right, of course. You do empathize with both of them, and you want to see both of them in a way succeed, but also in a peaceful manner. Rita Moreno plays an original character named Valentina, who would be Doc's wife. And Doc is not in this movie. Valentina is actually an original character. Doc was a white male who married Valentina, who's Puerto Rican. They hear both sides of each group's story, and they have an ear and everything, and basically try to mitigate things as well. But I really loved her performance. Fun fact, she was in the original West Side Story, like I had mentioned before, as Anita. She won an Oscar for that. And so I think it's great that Ariana DeBose also wins an Oscar as Anita, which I'll touch on here in a second. But I really enjoy Valentina's role in this movie. I think it is very well done. And you really get to see how she empathizes with Tony and that she wants the best for him and that she's helping him try to turn his life around while also trying to do the same with all these other boys as well. I really think that she should have been nominated for an Oscar for her role in this movie because I really enjoyed it. She has a beautiful singing voice. She has a very deep part in the movie as well, and she plays it super well too. And of course, Ariana DeBose plays Anita, who is Maria's friend, and she's also dating Maria's brother, Bernardo. And I liked her performance in this movie. I don't know if I would have given her the Oscar necessarily for Best Supporting Actress, but I thought she did well enough. I think early on in the movie, her role is a little limited, and it's not really fleshed out until mid to the halfway point of the movie, all the way to the ending portion of the movie where she makes her exit after telling, well, I'll get into spoilers here in a second. But she did a really good job. I think it's a good performance. Don't know if it was my favorite necessarily, but you know what? Good for her for winning that supporting actress Oscar. I guess the role of Anita is blessed and is always going to win a Best Supporting Actress Oscar since it's now 2 for 2. Now, I want to go ahead and get into the spoilers of the latter part of the movie. So if you have not seen West Side Story, the original West Side Story, the musical version of West Side Story, any of those, or even read Romeo and Juliet, then spoilers ahead for pretty much all of those. So like I had mentioned, Tony and Maria, they decide that they are going to date in secret. However, her brother Bernardo finds out and then challenges Tony to a duel. And so the Jets and the Sharks, they come together and get ready for this big skirmish. Tony is going to hide out, but he knows that Riff is bringing a gun to it, so he's trying to de-escalate the whole situation in general. So he goes to this fight, and he tries to talk to Bernardo, but they start getting into it, and eventually Tony just kind of backs off and it's like, look, I'm done with this. I'm not going to continue fighting. And that's when a knife gets pulled out, and there's a knife fight between both Riff and Bernardo. And as Riff is bouncing off Tony and trying to get back into the fight, Bernardo stabs him and ends up killing him. And in just this rage, Tony goes in and takes the knife and kills Bernardo with it. Soon after, the police show up, and then they all scatter, but not before the gun gets dropped, and then Chino, who is part of the Sharks group, picks it up and runs off as well. Soon after, Maria learns from Chino that Tony did kill Bernardo, and she gets mad at him whenever Tony tries to approach her, but they end up making up over it, which I don't know how you forgive someone who you've known for maybe 2 days that, oh, you killed my brother, but I still love you. To me, that's just always bewildering to me. Anyways, Tony goes off to Valentina's shop so he can hide out and tries to get ready to leave. And him and Maria are going to run off together and spend the rest of their life together because he realizes that he can't stay around New York. He's going to be hunted down by the rest of the sharks. It's at this point that Maria sends Anita to go to Valentina's shop and let Tony know that, hey, I am going to meet you at this specific place and we'll run off together. However, whenever she gets there, the rest of the Jets are there and they start harassing her. In fact, it gets a little handsy at one point. I don't know if this was in the original movie or not, but it almost becomes a rape scene in a way. But Valentina stops the boys from doing anything worse. And so in a fit of rage, Anita tells Valentina to tell Tony that Chino has killed Maria in revenge because Chino was in love with Maria and Maria still wanted Tony, so Chino ended up killing her, which is obviously false. And so Valentina goes downstairs, tells Tony this, and Tony runs out of the shop and starts yelling in the streets, saying, Chino, if you're out there, come and kill me. I can't live like this anymore. And as he's running around, he spots Maria in the street trying to find him. And so he starts running towards Maria. But as he's doing that, Chino comes out onto the street and starts shooting Tony in the back. And then Tony falls down. Maria goes over to console Tony, and Tony dies in her arms. And then she takes the gun from Chino and threatens to shoot him and the rest of the sharks and the Jets and say, this is what happened because of your stupid feud. And at this point, she just breaks down. The Jets go and pick up Tony's body, and then they get assisted by the sharks. And so they finally get to reconcile their differences and start carrying Tony off of the street and out of shot. And then you see the police come up as they get ready to arrest Chino, and then it fades to black and the movie ends. Overall, pretty sad ending, not gonna lie. And like I said, if you've read Romeo and Juliet, so I knew what was gonna happen, but since I didn't know that Maria didn't die as well, I thought that was also gonna happen, and it just turns out Tony's the only one that ended up dying. Almost a very unsatisfying conclusion. Not that your movie has to have a happy ending, far from it, but it just shows them walking the body off the screen, and then that was just the end of the movie, and I thought there should have been some other type of resolve to it. I don't know. So I have a couple of complaints with that. My other biggest complaint with this movie is that the Puerto Ricans of the movie, they speak a lot of Spanish, but you don't understand anything that they're saying. And I kind of wish that they had thrown in subtitles or were translated in some way so you kind of know some of the nuances of what they were saying. Granted, there's some words that I can pick up or the tone of which I can completely understand what they're trying to convey. But as someone who does not speak Spanish and never took any classes in high school, I really don't know what is being said. And so I like to know more about what is being said on screen. Overall, though, I thought this movie was pretty solid. I think it's a fun movie. I think it's a great musical adaptation. And if you haven't seen it yet or haven't seen West Side Story in a very long time, this is something you should watch. And I think it's something that you would enjoy as well. So overall, I'm going to give this movie an 8 out of 10. So, have you seen West Side Story? Did you think it was better than the original? Tell me what you thought. I'd love to hear what you have to say, and you can follow me on Facebook or Twitter. We can communicate that way, and I'll also post updates to the show as well so you know what's coming out next. As always, guys, thank you for joining me on the Cinephile Gamers podcast. I can't wait to see you on the next episode.